If you frequent any fighting game online spaces, you've probably seen this Evo clip by now. Hayao, a top-level Hugo player, pulls off an impossibly difficult comeback in Third Strike, a fan-favorite game. Similar to the well-known Evo moment 37, I will say now, this guy is an absolute blast to watch, both in-game and through the player cam. His stage presence is an absolute treat to experience. We saw a ton of hilarious and also impressive clips come out of this player this weekend. But this clip in particular generated a lot of buzz. As this clip was circulating, one response by James Chen really stuck out to me. He says, "My soapbox for the day. When we get hyped for this, remember, we are getting hype for execution. To get these air parries and follow-up combos, it takes practice, timing, and nerves of steel. It's not enough to just predict it, it's skill. Execution belongs in fighting games." Execution it's a little bit of an evergreen topic of discourse in the community. On one hand, fighting games can be difficult to get into, a lot of times requiring you to learn some sort of combo or go through a tutorial full of text boxes that you won't remember anything from. There is absolutely a hurdle to overcome when getting into this genre. So as fighting game devs continue to pursue higher and higher player counts, as they should, I mean, they are businesses, they have to tackle this hurdle. Different games have pursued different routes of tackling this. Street Fighter has modern controls where it offers the player a simplified input system and a simplified moveset to kind of get them in the flow of things. There's things like Grand Blue that have a skill bar, so you can use a skill macro to use one off the skill bar, but it has a longer cooldown. But if you do the traditional motion input, you will get basically no cooldown whatsoever. And you see some stuff maybe like defensively too, with like Type Lumina's more streamlined shield shenanigans. But all these are really just different attempts to reduce hurdles in these games. And developers have tried it a whole bunch of different ways. But unfortunately, something's a little bit lost when this happens. Lost is some of the spectacle on what makes a fighting game hype and enjoyable to just play and watch. So recently I have been playing Guilty Gear Rev 2 for a video I have coming up, and I've been grinding the crap out of this core 50-meter combo that Elphelt has, and I absolutely suck at it. I really suck at it. But this is a hurdle and I have to overcome it to get the most out of this character. Is grinding out the combo and constantly dropping it because I didn't delay the jump heavy at the right time frustrating? Yeah, of course it is, but as I slowly get more and more consistent with it, it feels really good to complete the combo. I don't do it often, but I'm getting a little bit more consistent with it. And that's just because difficult challenges are fun to overcome. The reward when it lands is so much higher because I had to put in the work to do it. Fighting games, I think, are the most enjoyable when there is like two core groups of skill you need to improve on. One group is just being game knowledge. This is done primarily by playing other players, familiarizing yourself with the cast and what they can do and what you can do to win openings. Then there's this second group. This is like your tools. This is knowing what combos to use or knowing the timing on instant blocks. This is mostly like mechanical execution based stuff. And I think a good fighting game will balance these two. As you play people, you'll understand how certain tools are utilized, or you might realize what tools you're missing for certain situations, and you go into training mode and you sharpen these tools. You go back into matches, rinse and repeat. Overcoming this iceberg of game knowledge is rewarding, but overcoming the execution iceberg is just as rewarding. This Hayao clip, there's a lot that could have gone wrong. He had to have predicted the move was going to come out when it did. He had to air parry each hit. This is only a 7-frame window, which you have to hit forward, and because he had just a sliver of health, if he didn't parry, that was the round. It would have just been a wrap. But after parrying all of these hits, he then needed to know what to do after this specific situation, so he'd be able to punish the move. This single moment was the accumulation of so many countless hours of practice, playing, and studying. But that's why it is exciting. This in itself is a little bit of an extreme situation, but these kinds of moments can happen to you when you're just playing at a local or you're playing against friends. When they do happen, they are extremely exciting and they really stick with you. And I feel like that's something that's getting more and more lost as we move forward as a genre. I think having this type of high execution but high reward mechanic in a fighting game not only makes it so much more fun to watch, but so much more fun to play. Having some sort of X factors that can turn the tides of what seems to be an unbeatable match for you, and you can turn it into a win. It's exciting and keeps you on your toes. It also rewards you for the countless hours you've already sunken into the game. I find it a bit boring when you reach a certain point in a fighting game and you no longer have any more tools to add to your arsenal. There's nothing really to grind out in training mode. You really are just reliant on improving your game knowledge, your adaptation, and like learning your opponent. Yes, overcoming your opponent is a massive part of fighting games, but I personally find grinding in training mode pretty close to that level of enjoyment now, and I think this is robbing new players of that excitement and overall leaving a bad taste in the mouths of the enfranchised players who are trying out these new games. So what should fighting games do to try to onboard people into this genre? Well, what if we just trick them? I'm serious, single-player content is something that has always been lacking in the genre. It's always been multiplayer first, and obviously it's a fighting game. It relies on having one-on-one human interaction. But let's just take a moment, let's look at the Dark Souls community. People were introduced to these games as a single-player experience, but they wanted more, so they discovered PvP, and the next thing you know, they were learning some basic fighting game concepts, things like neutral and whiff punishing. But they didn't set out to learn these from the start. They just enjoyed the mechanics of the game that they played for the single player experience, and they wanted to further explore that. Now imagine what if we did like a Metroidvania where you unlock system mechanics or special moves or special like movement tech and stuff like that. Something that comes to mind is like Lei Lei's hook thing from Vampire Saviors. I think that's a really cool thing. Imagine if there was like a gap and you unlock that, so now you have to do the input to get across the gap or something like that. There are definitely a lot of ways you could implement this, you know, locking certain special moves behind barriers, forcing them to get unlocked, maybe even like being able to cancel certain stuff, or maybe getting like a larger meter. And it's a way to kind of control and drip feed the player with a bunch of different things. And then if they end up really liking the experience, once they have everything unlocked and they get to the end of the game, then there is multiplayer to discover. An interesting example of something that is single player focused I saw on Twitter is a indie game called Zenith Beat. This specific scenario is what they called a Dark Souls inspired fighting game boss. Basically, so here it is, Zenith Beat, where the boss version of the character always has armor, unblockable attacks, multiple phases, and extra video game boss-like moves that you have to learn and dodge. I think this is a really interesting twist on just the fighting game gameplay that's more adjusted to single player content. And I think maybe a lot of that's just missing. I know fighting games, they're pretty like, they're expensive, obviously, and they are already big risks. So being able to dump all these resources, time, and money into a single-player experience that is untested is pretty risky. But I do think that's kind of where indie games are going to come up and thrive. I do think we are seeing a indie game boom when it comes to fighting games, and that's a whole nother video I have been working on for a little bit, so expect that. I think fighting game devs they're really missing an opportunity on providing a very unique single player experience by pulling inspiration from other genres. Because I mean, let's face it, single player content right now is you do a CPU battle, you get a cutscene, some dialogue or whatever, and then you move on. I mean, hey, Guilty Gear Strive doesn't even have gameplay, it's just a movie. And I think it's a real shame, obviously. There's ways we can introduce people to the genre without just throwing them off the deep end. And I think that's probably the best way, instead of changing the fundamental thing that we all grew to love with this genre. Introduce players to the game in a unique and novel way. Get people talking about the single player experience for it being a good game, not because, oh, look, this single player experience taught me something I can use here. No, just make a single player experience that's worth playing by itself. A good story, good gameplay, good exploration, whatever it is, whatever genre they decide to try to mix fighting games with. I think there is a large gap here and something that hasn't been explored. And I'm hoping to see indie games take this to a whole new level. We saw some stuff with like Them's Fightin' Herds where you had the salt mines and you had the single player story, but unfortunately a lot of that got canned with the whole modus stuff, and they just kind of, it is a whole different debacle there. But they had the right ideas, they just weren't able to execute it because they didn't have enough time or money. But I'm hoping we can maybe see a shift later on. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think single player experiences is the way to properly introduce people into fighting games? I think that's probably a more realistic way to get people into this genre, because it is hard to get into it. But I think the current way of dumbing down games, simplifying them to reduce that hurdle, is kind of just ignoring the fact that doing hard stuff in fighting games is fun, and you're just kind of robbing the new player of that experience. But as always, keep playing fighting games, keep talking about them, and have a good rest of your day.